Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. One of the most important things to get right if you're a prepper is your food storage. While different kinds of survival gear are useful and can be fun, all of us have to eat. And because of this, we tend to invest quite a bit of money into making sure that we and our loved ones have enough food to last through whatever doodle hit the poodle situation may come our way. But when it comes to food storage, knowing what not to buy is just as important as knowing what types of food work best and the proper ways to store them. Doing that will help you save money on your preps and avoid waste, which will allow you to store a lot more food in the long run. Now, before we get started, there are a lot of items on this list that I have in my stockpile, and most of y'all probably do too, and if that's the case, it isn't the end of the world. There could be good reasons why you chose to buy them over other better options, or maybe you just wanted to have a little bit on hand because you like it, and while that's fine, it is important to understand the drawbacks of those foods so that you can work around them. Like, you don't want to store something expecting it to last for 20 years only for it to last around like 5 or 6 or even less. And the first thing that we have to talk about when it comes to this is fresh and frozen food. And yes, this should be obvious. Everybody should know this. If you're somebody who gets a loaf of bread, you stuff it in Mylar thinking it's going to last for 30 years, as we say in the South, bless your little heart. But things like fruit, veggies, bread, also meat, they're not going to last long. Now, there are things that you can do to make certain things last longer, like if you go buy fresh fruit or you grow veggies in your garden, then you can those. And if you have the ability to do that, then of course that is a good thing. But just in their normal form, they're not going to last very long. Frozen food's better, but you shouldn't count on it for long-term situations. If we're dealing with something where there's a big grid down situation, then your freezer might not be working. If you have a generator, it could break down, or if it's a solar generator, it might just not be able to keep up with it long term. What frozen foods are really good for is having a longer term supply of seasonal items, and then also having a meat stockpile to hedge against inflation. Now, probably a better option if you're concerned about long-term survival is canned meat. You can get that in a lot of different varieties. You can get canned beef, canned chicken, you can get little canned hams, and that's a really good way to have a protein source long-term. Next thing preppers shouldn't stockpile a whole lot of is flour and cornmeal. Those have a very short shelf life of around 3 to 5 years, and that's even in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. If you just have them in their regular packaging stuffed into the pantry, they're going to last a lot less than even that. And the reason for that is grains, they don't last very long if they have been ground up. Now, if you have something like wheat berries, then those actually can last for 20 years or more if they're stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. There are also some types of corn that can store for quite a while as well. But if you're going to store actual grains, then you are going to need some sort of grain mill, and those can get pretty expensive. The Country Living grain mill, which is considered by many to be the gold standard of grain mills, I think it's up to like $700 now, if I'm remembering correctly. You can get less expensive ones for several $100s less. I'm not sure on the quality of them, but regardless, if you're wanting a decent grain mill, you're going to be spending quite a bit of money on it. Another food item that preppers shouldn't stockpile a lot of is brown rice, and it has a shorter shelf life than other types of rice due to its high oil content that will eventually cause it to go rancid. White rice, jasmine, and basmati rice all have a longer shelf life. So if you're thinking of rice that has like a 20 or more year shelf life, those are the varieties that you're going to want to pick up. Now, the downside to that is that those varieties of rice with a longer shelf life also have lower nutritional value. So what some people do is that they'll store a small amount of brown rice that they will rotate through, and then they will have a larger stockpile of those other kinds of rice that'll give them a kind of a more reliable, longer term food supply. Another food item that'll go rancid relatively quickly is nuts, and the reason for that is that they have a high fat content. They'll generally last around 6 to 9 months in the package that they come in if they're unopened. Of course, different types of nuts will have different shelf lives in general, Pine nuts have the shortest shelf life, or one of the shortest shelf lives, and almonds tend to be kind of on the longer end of that spectrum. But nuts can last for around 12 to 24 months in a freezer. So even then, even when they're frozen, they're still going to have a much shorter shelf life than other types of food. Probably the best way to have a long-term supply of nuts is to plant a nut tree that will grow well in your area. I know that when I was growing up, my great-grandparents, they had a couple of pecan trees in their backyard, and there were pecans everywhere. I remember when I was a kid going around and picking them and stuff, and they had a ton of them in their freezer. But, I mean, if you just have a few nut trees in your yard, that should give you quite a bit once that they reach maturity. Another food I wouldn't stockpile a lot of is ground coffee. Now, there are ways that you can store coffee, but when most people go to the store, they're going to buy something like a canister of pre-ground, like Folgers, Maxwell House, whatever the case may be, or K-Cups. And all that stuff is going to be roasted and ground, and it's going to have a really short shelf life of around 3 to 5 months. Roasted but not ground coffee beans, they can last for up to 12 months if you store them properly, but even that's really not that long. If you're wanting a decent long-term supply of coffee, your best chance is going to be freeze-dried instant coffee. Now, that's not some special type of instant coffee. You don't have to go out and buy survival coffee. Like, you don't have to go out and buy Tactical Pete's Small Ninja Brew or anything like that. If you go to the store and you buy either an instant coffee like store brand or Folgers instant brew, most of that's going to be freeze-dried and it'll store for a really long time. Now, if you put it in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, it should store even longer because most of that stuff is going to come in a plastic jar nowadays. And first of all, the plastic, it is at least somewhat air permeable. Some air is going to get through it, but also the seal on top of it, it's just kind of like this flimsy paper stuff, and that's not really going to last. The Mylar will give you a much better seal against air, moisture, and then also light. Another food item that won't even last a year is crackers. Those generally have a shelf life of around 6 months, just depending on what their ingredients are. But that's one thing that I have mentioned in my previous videos. It's better for shorter term situations because you can use it with things like peanut butter, and it's very easy to prepare. You don't even need a camp stove or anything like that. So it might be worth just having a few months worth on hand, especially if you eat them regularly. Like my kid, he goes through them like you would not believe. But have a few months on hand and then rotate through them. That way you're never getting close to the point where those crackers are going to go bad. But if there's a situation where you can't get out to the store for a few weeks, maybe you're snowed in or some other minor situation, you'll have what you need and you won't have to worry about it. One food, though, that has a short shelf life that's kind of surprising to some people is fruit juice. Those will usually last around 6 to 12 months, and there's a couple reasons that they don't last as long maybe as what people think they would. Most fruit juices are pasteurized, and that should take care of most bacteria and enzymes, but it doesn't take care of everything. So there's still a chance that there's going to be some sort of biological activity happening into that container. Then also plastic containers, like I mentioned a second ago with the coffee, they are going to let some air in. They're not 100% impermeable. And then, of course, since the containers are transparent, you can see the juice inside, then it's letting light in, and light, air, and moisture, and then also temperature fluctuations. Those are the things that are going to degrade your food faster than if they weren't present. Then kind of similar to that is applesauce. Most of that is stored in plastic containers, just like fruit juice. Another issue with it is that once you do open it, it's going to go bad extremely quickly without some sort of refrigeration. So if you want to have like a small stock of that, don't buy like the big jumbo containers of it that you're going to get just a little bit out of and the rest of it's going to go to waste. Try to get smaller jars, smaller portions, however you can do that, so that if you do want to store some of that, especially like if you have younger kids, it's really good for that. But that way you'll be able to use it without a whole lot of it going to waste. Another item I wouldn't really buy a whole lot of, and it pains me to admit this, is store-bought beef jerky. This will only usually last for around a year. It's not like older style jerkies that are totally like devoid of moisture. If you get things like Sweet Baby Ray's or any of that other stuff that you get at the checkout stand, or Jack Links, any of that, you know, I mean, it is still a little bit moist, especially the more tender stuff, and that's going to contribute to it having a shorter shelf life than older types of jerky might. But it is okay to have a little bit on hand for short-term emergencies. It's a very good source of protein, requires no preparation. So maybe it's one of those things that you want to have a bag of it in, say, your bug out bag, and then once it gets, 6 to 9 months old, you eat it as a snack and then replace it with a new one. It would probably work very good if you were to use it in that way. Next thing that I wouldn't recommend storing a whole lot of is just generic food storage buckets. And this one's going to get me in maybe some trouble with some people. It's sort of like a holy grail item or whatever in the prepper community, but a lot of those really aren't that good. First off, they're expensive. You're going to be able to buy a whole lot of probably better food for cheaper if you just do like dry goods, canned goods, stuff like that. And also, if you look at the reviews of a lot of them, the taste really is hit or miss. It seems like with them, the more that they advertise, especially on like YouTube video ads, usually they're not quite as good. Things like Mountain House that generally taste a little bit better, you don't see ads for them, exploding in the mid-rolls on these videos. Then also, a lot of them really aren't that nutritious. They're packed with sugar, carbs, and sodium rather than other things that your body actually needs. A lot of the time, they use those to, especially like the sugar and the carbs, to get the calorie count up so they can say, oh, wait, we give you however many calories a day, good for us, but they're not necessarily good calories. Be sure you're looking at the nutrition information to determine if you're actually getting what you think you are. But one really good way to utilize freeze-dried foods is to get individual ingredients. There are places like Augason Farms that they'll sell like powdered eggs, powdered butter, and those are the types of things that they're really hard to stockpile in other forms. So taking advantage of them in, freeze-dried packaging, that can work really well for you. You can use them to create larger meals. And then also the individual freeze-dried meals in moderation, or the number 10 cans for family meals in moderation, can work well. Also, say this all the time, they're great for morale boosters, and also the individual pouches work really well for things like your bug out bag, or if you're going to go on a camping trip. I know last week I did a video for my my Reloaded channel, and I spent pretty much most of the day at the range, and I wanted to be able to have a lunch with me so I wouldn't have to leave and pack up and then drag my stuff back out. So I just took a Mountain House chili mac meal and my Jetboil, cooked that up, and then ate right there. They're very convenient for those types of situations. Another thing you shouldn't stockpile long term that may surprise some people is garden seeds. And the reason for that mainly is that germination rates are going to drop each year. A lot of the times you have people that they'll buy these seed vaults and they're like, oh, okay, I'll just stick these seeds to the side and then use them when I need them. But they don't realize that those seeds lose potency as time goes on. And even if they do germinate, the plants that those seeds produce may not be as healthy and as productive as they would be if that plant was grown from a fresh seed. So it really is best to buy your seeds, use them, collect seeds at the end of the season. Of course, you need heirloom varieties to be able to do that, and then use those seeds the following year. But even though the items that I've shown in this video go bad relatively quickly, there are plenty of others that don't. So if you want to see a list of foods that can last for decades in storage, then click here. Or if you want to see a list of canned goods that every prepper should stockpile, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.